Bear with me, I'm still dealing with COVID, so my throat hurts quite a bit, but I'm bearing through it because it's time to talk about DC Dual Force. Yesterday, I did my big deep dive on the Energy faction. At the end of this video, we're going to go over a couple cards from the Energy faction that I wasn't able to give my full opinion on because we were unaware of a couple keywords. But for the most part, this video is going to be all about the Anarchy faction. Unlike the other factions, there isn't any crazy token synergy stuff going on with, you know, magical spells or gadgets or anything like that. So we can straight up just jump in and immediately start talking about all of the cards. So let's get started with the faction's leaders. Going in order of defense value and then alphabetical order, we're starting off with Harley Quinn. Harley Quinn reads End, Adrenaline, draw a card, and then her activation costs 2, and it gives her +3 attack. If you haven't seen this card before, you're probably wondering what Adrenaline does. Don't worry, I've got your answer. Adrenaline reads, while your hand is empty, this effect is active. So, for Harley Quinn to draw a card, you must end your turn with an empty hand. Now, I haven't had the time to science out this yet, because if you don't know, I've been playing the game a lot on Tabletop Simulator, so I can't really report results with Harley Quinn, because I haven't played a single game with Harley Quinn yet, but I imagine, even with some of the discard mechanics we're going to see in the archetype here, building a cohesive deck around this strategy seems a little difficult, but there are some really strong, powerful discard effects that are probably worth running, and then as a result, Harley Quinn will be quite strong. It's also worth mentioning having access to at least 2 cards in your hand every single turn is really important because the game is so focused on those 2 energy sources, or those 2 resources, I should say. Harley Quinn giving you an extra card draw each turn, even though you have a quote-unquote empty hand, can help you keep up with the opponent in the late game because you get your card draw from your start of turn and then your end of turn effect from Harley Quinn, so you'll always be able to use at least those 2 resources that you have every single turn. I mean, you might not draw efficiently, but at the very least, you know you'll be able to play 2 cards. I was really excited about the old Harley Quinn design. I don't know if I'm as excited to play this version of Harley Quinn, but I'm definitely willing to try it out because it's definitely a unique archetype in the game, and I'm sure I'm going to put thousands of hours into every archetype in this game. Here's an interesting card, and that is the Joker. The Joker is another 18 defense leader, and he's got a 3-cost effect. He reads, the Joker gets +2 attack this turn and fires 4 shots that deal 1 damage at random enemies. If you have an Arkham inmate, charge the Joker. So if you've got an Arkham inmate in play, you'll get 1 charge back from this. So effectively, it's kind of a 2-cost ability, but you need 3 in order to initialize it. Now, the interesting thing about this is what we learned about firepower. Firepower increases the damage value of effects, more specifically action effects, and then also leader ability. So because Joker not only gains attack, but also does damage with his ability, every firepower card synergizes with the Joker. Because he fires off 4 shots, he gets extra value out of every firepower effect. So as we bring up firepower cards, keep in mind that when paired with the Joker, they're going to work out really well. Even just as a 1 damage ping triggering 4 times, that can be pretty impactful on turn 3, especially if you're getting back some of the charge, you're going to be able to do it every 2 turns. If you're building your deck around Arkham inmates, but I don't even think you necessarily need to build your deck around Arkham inmates for the Joker. This effect on its own is just kind of solid. It does suck that because the board space is so restricted in this game, we're playing on a 3x2 grid. It means you only have 4 slots for recruits and then 2 slots for your 2 leaders. That opens up a little bit as the game goes on. If you lose one of your leaders, now you've got 5 slots for recruits. But all of that is to say, 2 of the options on board will always be the opponent leaders, and usually it's going to be worse for you to hit a leader than it will be to hit a recruit, so that definitely limits the value of the Joker, but I don't think that hurts him too much at all. I think he's still going to be a fantastic card. I'm really excited to experiment with the Joker and experiment with firepower as a mechanic, and Joker will be the place to do that for sure. Of all of the Anarchy leaders we talk about today, Joker is definitely the one I'm most excited to use. Let's move on to Doomsday next, though. Doomsday is a 24 defense leader. This is the highest defense value leader in the game so far, so even though his effect is quite aggressive, perhaps you could even just get away with running him in a more defensive strategy just because of his high defense value. That's probably not the case, but it's worth keeping in mind at the very least. Anyway, his effect is pretty awesome. He's got a 4-cost effect. It reads, Doomsday gets +10 attack this turn. That is a crazy amount of attack, but the trade-off is that, of course, it costs 4, so it's a little bit slower than, well, it's a lot slower than most of the abilities in the game. However, he's got a secondary part of his effect, its first couple lines, and it reads, after an enemy leader is KO'd, charge Doomsday twice. So he's got a built-in charge ramp mechanic, and that lets him activate that 10 damage a little bit more frequently. The only issue is he's going to feel kind of useless for the first 3 turns or so of the game. It is nice that Doomsday does have that 24 defense value, because otherwise you would feel pretty bad about, you know, spending 4 turns worth of charge just to gain 10 attack and then remove something and then also receive retaliate damage as a result. Doomsday, though, having 24 defense kind of mitigates that that downside of receiving the retaliate damage. All right, let's jump into the card list. Let's just start talking about cards. We've gone over leaders. It's time to talk about individual cards. We're going to start off with free cards. So normally we go in order of cost, but Anarchy has access to 2 free cards, so we're going to quickly talk about those. Starting off first with the Murderous Mugger. Murderous Mugger is just a 2/1 vanilla stats, no effect. He's not a part of a tribe or anything like that, but he's free, so you can play this card completely for free. It's a nice way to empty your hand if you're trying to empty your hand for adrenaline effects. Murderous Mugger is a free way to get a card out of your hand. I definitely think you'll see play, despite being a relatively underwhelming card. Here's a cool design for a card that I think is really interesting. We have Kite Man. Kite Man is a 3/1, again, a free card, so you can just play this card, no cost required, but he has Hunter. Kite Man can only attack leaders, so the cool thing about Hunter is that it doesn't matter what our opponent's board state looks like, we can still attack over whatever they have in play in order to attack the opponent's leader. The only downside is that, of course, we can't use Kite Man to ever trade into anything. We must target the opponent leader. I think this is a really cool design for a card. I'm leaning towards it being pretty good because the opponent's going to have to trade into this thing with their early game cards, because if they don't, you're just going to sit there and attack them for 3 damage every single turn. The opponent does have to deal with this somehow. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of spot damage effects in the game that can deal with a 1 defense creature, but they're not going to always be able to do that. Sometimes they're going to have to trade their 2/3 into this 3/1 that you didn't pay anything for. And as long as that's happening, that's pretty good for you, especially because it's also contributing to you getting closer and closer to those adrenaline effects. So yeah, the more I talk about Kite Man, the more I'm convinced he's actually pretty good. He's also got the Arkham Inmate tag, which is something we didn't talk about at the start of the video, but something I probably should have mentioned. Arkham Inmates are going to be very important as we look at more of these cards, not only because of the Joker effect that we saw, because he wants an Arkham Inmate to be in play, but that you'll also see other cards that want you to have more and more Arkham Inmates. All right, moving on to bronze cards, starting with Whack-A-Man. First time I actually read that name of the card. It's a spot damage effect with a little bit of randomness thrown in. This is the highest spot damage card we've seen at the bronze entry point. It's deal 4 damage to a random enemy recruit. 4 damage is quite a bit of damage. The only issue is, of course, that it is random, but it's got controlled randomness. This will never hit an enemy leader, only hit recruits. So honestly, I think this is just a good spot damage spell. Maybe even better than some of the other ones we've seen in the other archetypes, or the other factions, I should say. Gotham Riots. Gotham Riots reads, summon rioters in your empty spaces. Rioters are just 1/1 tokens. They're not Arkham Inmates, they're just regular dudes. I'm not sure how effective this is. Again, the board space is really restrictive in Dual Force. Don't get me wrong, I think there are going to be decks that probably want to run Gotham Riots, but this is not something you can just plug into your deck. Your deck needs to want to have a reason to put that many things in play. Otherwise, they're probably going to get in your way quite a lot of the time. Shoot Randomly is up next. This is another card that kind of synergizes with Firepower as a mechanic, but it also is pretty much the Joker effect, but on a card. Do this 3 times, deal 1 damage to a random enemy character. So it triggers 1 less than the Joker, but if you have a Firepower effect in play, you draw a couple Shoot Randomlies, you use Joker's effect, and then you play a couple Shoot Randomlies, you're going crazy, right? You're dealing a ton of damage. Now they're all going to random sources, but ultimately it's probably going to end up clearing up the board and putting you in a pretty advantageous state. I'm definitely excited to experiment with Shoot Randomly as soon as possible. Going on to Devil's Night now. Devil's Night reads, give your recruits +2 attack this turn. I will say attack is significantly less valued in this game than defense. At least that's my read on the game so far, based on the experimenting I've done on Tabletop Simulator, and just based on my read of the way that the game works. Even before I experimented with the game on Tabletop Simulator. This type of effect in another game is extraordinarily scary, and don't get me wrong, it's still a good effect in this game, I think, but it's just a little less scary in this game than in other games. I mean, in your ideal scenario, literally your ideal scenario, this is +8 damage for a bronze card, which, don't get me wrong, is certainly good, but it needs to be a super ideal scenario. There needs to be no blockers. You need to have 4 creatures in play. I guess you could even have 5 creatures in play if you've lost one of your leaders. So I guess in an ultra ideal scenario, it's plus, oh god, why can't I do math? It's +10. But again, we're talking about really ideal scenarios, and I don't think you're going to be in that situation too often. This game seems very tempo-oriented to me, and I think in a lot of cases you're not going to have the ideal setup for Devil's Night, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe Devil's Night's just ultra broken, who knows. Moving on to Clayface, this is an Arkham Inmate enabler, so keep an eye on all of the future Arkham Inmates we're going to talk about. He himself is an Arkham Inmate, which is pretty cool. But he's a 1/2, and he reads, after you deploy another Arkham Inmate, Clayface gets +2/+1. Interesting that he gets +2/+1. Usually when you see an effect like this, it's just like +1/+1, and the base stats are better. So it's cool that he ramps up his attack a little bit faster than he ramps up his defense. Also kind of speaks to that kind of idea that I was talking about, where attack is a slightly less important stat than defense. I think this goes without saying that if you're running an Arkham Inmate deck, you run Clayface. The question is an Arkham inmate deck going to be optimal? I'll say, because I have like a holistic view, you know, I see all the cards in front of me. I'll say that an Arkham inmate deck at the very least seems viable, and I do expect to see Clayface see play in that archetype. Next up is another Arkham inmate, that's Man-Bat. He reads speed, he's a 3/2, so he can be played and then immediately attack, which is pretty awesome. But he also reads start, return Man-Bat to your hand. So you want to get value out of Man-Bat as quickly as possible, and then maybe return him to your hand and play him again in the future. The cool thing about this is that if you're running this in an adrenaline deck, you play Man-Bat out, you attack with speed maybe into the opponent's leader, you get your adrenaline proc at the end of turn from Harley Quinn, so she draws you a card, but then Man-Bat comes back, and then you can try to proc adrenaline again by playing Man-Bat and then maybe another card that reads discard a card or something like that. So he kind of enables that adrenaline package, but honestly, he enables it in kind of a roundabout way because he's putting cards back into your hand, plus you're drawing a card from Harley Quinn, plus you're getting a natural card draw. So now you have an extra card you need to be able to get rid of during your turn somehow. Don't get me wrong, there's going to be situations where that plays out really, really well for you. But there's also going to be situations where that probably hurts you a little bit, assuming you're trying to put Man-Bat in that adrenaline package. But you also just don't need to put him in that adrenaline package. I mean, a 3/2 with speed is just kind of good. The downside, of course, being that it doesn't stick around in play next turn. Next up is Mr. Freeze, also an Arkham inmate. He's a 2/2 with deploy, exhaust an enemy leader, and deal 3 damage to them. Exhausting an enemy leader is so good, man. I think this card is really, really good. Now, technically, we don't have confirmation of this, but I assume exhaust means they can't use an ability or attack. They definitely shouldn't be able to attack, but they might be able to still use their ability. That's a little bit unclear at the moment. But for now, I'm assuming they can't use their ability. Either way, I think Mr. Freeze is a great card. Not only is he exhausting the enemy leader, but he's also dealing 3 damage to them. Seems good in aggressive decks, seems good in kind of mid-rangey decks that want to focus on disruption stuff. It seems like a really well-rounded card that will see a play in a variety of different archetypes. Next up, we've got Two-Face. Two-Face is an ultimate card. I haven't talked about this in any videos yet because I wasn't quite sure, but I can indeed confirm that this ultimate gem here, this yellow gem, means you can only run 1 copy of the card. So if we're putting Two-Face in our deck, this is the one and only Two-Face that we can run. We can't run 2 copies of this card. This is a 2/2. And it reads deploy. Choose an enemy recruit. Flip a coin to decide. KO them or draw a card. I assume this is going to have some cute animation where the KO is like the burnt face of Two-Face, and then the other side is the draw card. Very, very flashy effect. I like this one a lot. And either coin flip is good for you, you know? It could have easily have been, you know, KO them or do nothing. KO them and draw a card is fine. A 2/2 that just draws a card when you play it is great. And a 2/2 that destroys an enemy card is also fantastic. Two-Face is a great card, and I expect to see it be played in Arkham inmate decks and a variety of other types of decks. Ventriloquist is up next. He's a 1/1, also an Arkham inmate, and reads after you deploy another Arkham inmate, create and play shoot randomly. This is very good. This card right here, very good. We like this card. We put this in all of our Arkham inmate decks. Very, very good card. We run this card every single opportunity we get. Not only are you creating a shoot randomly, but you're also playing it. Imagine this with some firepower out there on the board. Gonna go crazy. Next up is Victor Zsasz, who is a 4/2. These stats are very, very good. 4/2 is just enough to be able to positively trade into enemy silver cards. Very, very, very good stats. And then also he's an Arkham inmate, and he also doesn't have 1 defense, right? He's got 2 defense. That's going to save him from certain pings. It's going to save him from shoot randomly. 2 defense is just enough to save you from a variety of effects. Plus, on top of that, he's an Arkham inmate. I think Victor Zsasz is a great vanilla card, and you'll probably see a decent amount of Victor Zsasz floating about, especially if the Arkham inmate archetype works out. Then we have Punchline. Honestly, I don't know how I feel about Punchline. Punchline is a 2/1 with lethal. This is just good. Don't worry about the rest of her text. If our card has lethal written on it and it's a bronze card, it's probably good. At least that's my interpretation so far. But that's not all. She also has, while you have a Joker leader, your recruits are Arkham inmates. So as long as Punchline is in play, literally everything you play is an Arkham inmate. I'm not sure if this will be necessary. I mean, maybe you run it because there's probably going to be a handful of cards in the Arkham inmate deck, like the optimal Arkham inmate deck, that aren't Arkham inmates. And then Punchline gives them Arkham inmate, but I would imagine most of your cards are going to be Arkham inmates anyway, so I'm not sure if running Punchline is worth it, but at the end of the day, it might just be worth it because a 2/1 with lethal that is a bronze is just pretty good anyway, so... but she's also got a little bit of competition. We have another bronze lethal card in the Anarchy archetype, and that's Killer Frost. Killer Frost is a 1/1 with lethal, and she reads deploy, exhaust each enemy leader. What is this, man? That is a crazy effect. Happy to see Killer Frost getting some love. I didn't even expect her to be in the base set, so that's pretty cool, though. Onomatopoeia is up next, which is a cool name for a card. He's a 2/2, and he just has firepower +1. This is going to synergize with some of that shoot randomly stuff we talked about. It's going to synergize with Joker. The only downside of this card is it is not an Arkham inmate, unlike so many of the cards we've talked about so far in the Anarchy factions. So that's definitely something to keep in mind as you build your Anarchy inmate decks out. And maybe that's the reason we run Punchline, because we're almost certainly going to run Onomatopoeia. But unfortunately, he doesn't have that Arkham inmate tag himself. Amygdala is going to be how I choose to pronounce that. I'm not sure if I butchered that or not. Hopefully not. He reads attack randomly. So you don't get to choose the targets for this one. But he reads Adrenaline. This card has +3 attack on your turn. So on your turn, he's a 6/4 if you have Adrenaline active at that time. But this does not apply during the opponent's turn. So during the opponent's turn, it's still just going to be a normal 3/4. But 3/4 is really good stats, honestly, especially for a bronze card. With the exception of generated cards, I think this is the best statted bronze card we've seen so far. Just going off of memory, I could be wrong about that. So ignore me if I am. Now, of course, the downside is that it attacks randomly. Is that a big enough downside to make this card not playable? I don't think so. I think this is a fine card. I think if you're building Adrenaline, you probably put this in because why not? Embrace Madness is discard a card, give your recruits in your deck +2 attack. I don't know how I feel about this card. I'm very, very divided on this card. It really comes down to how good Adrenaline cards are, I think. If Adrenaline as an archetype works, then Embrace Madness is probably going in that deck. That's really where this card sees the most value, right? It discards a card from your hand, so it gets you closer to the Adrenaline proc, and then every card you top deck from the Harley Quinn, basically this belongs in Harley Quinn decks. If you can really consistently proc that draw card effect, it makes sense to run Embrace the Madness, I think. I just don't know what that looks like, man. I need to science it out more. I don't feel the Embrace the Madness hype, but it's certainly possible, but it's just a consistency question. Oh, sweet. I love seeing Trickster get a card. After you discard a card, deal 3 damage to a random enemy leader. Again, this probably plugs into your Embrace the Madness Adrenaline archetype. And it's hard to know what that looks like because I haven't done a ton of theory crafting with it. Deal 3 damage to a random leader is no joke though, and then 3/3 as vanilla stats on a bronze card is pretty good as well. There's definitely some core cards coming together for the discard / Adrenaline archetype. So, you know, maybe I'm doubting this archetype a bit too much. The more I think about it, the more I think maybe I'm hating on this archetype a little too much. Maybe it's actually secret really good. That's all of the bronze cards out of the way. Let's move on to silver, starting with Solomon Grundy. Solomon Grundy is a 5/3 with Parting Shot. Parting Shot is like Death Rattle, or when this thing is destroyed, do this next effect. So this next effect in this case is summon Solomon Grundy without this ability and ready him. So once Solomon Grundy is destroyed, he'll come back as Solomon Grundy, and he won't even have summoning sickness. He'll just come in ready. So if you attack with Solomon Grundy, you can trade into something and then attack with Solomon Grundy again. That's pretty awesome. It's kind of like pseudo frenzy as long as you die on your first attack. Very, very, very cool effect. I do also want to mention there are multiple cards in this game that care about you playing 5 power cards, and Solomon Grundy is effectively 2 5 power cards because obviously there's himself and then the resummoning of Solomon Grundy. So this is probably a card to keep your eye on when you're building the 5 power archetype, because there are, again, quite a few cards that care about how many 5 power cards you control, how many you've played, when you play a 5 power card. I mean, we'll quickly bring up the Tyranny card, Black Adam, who's specifically checking for when you play a 5 power card. Solomon Grundy will trigger that twice, I believe, because while I don't have direct confirmation on this, I'm pretty certain that Black Adam will trigger whenever a card enters play, rather than when you play it from hand. Deploy just means when the card comes into play, rather than when the card is played from hand. So in theory, Solomon Grundy should proc Black Adam twice. So again, something to keep in mind. Moving on to Black Manta. Black Manta is a 5/3 that reads deploy, deal 5 damage to an enemy leader. I mean, this obviously belongs in some type of aggro strategy. I did play a couple games with this card on Tabletop Simulator, and I wasn't impressed with his 3 defense, but I was versing a deck that was particularly really good with dealing with low health creatures, so maybe it was just a matchup problem. But in general, I thought this card would be far more impactful than it ended up being. I'm not sold on Black Manta just yet. Next up is Captain Cold. This one is much more interesting to me. It's running into the same problem of having a very low defense value. It is reaching that 5 attack threshold that we just talked about. So did Black Manta as well. I didn't mention it on Black Manta, but it's something to keep in mind whenever you see 5 attack value on any card. Captain Cold reads end, exhaust each enemy leader. So if Captain Cold survives a whole turn rotation, or however long he survives for, the opponent is not going to be able to use their leaders. Very, very scary effect to keep in the game. There's a handful of really powerful disruption effects in the game that I'm excited to experiment with. Building the optimal deck for that is going to be harder than it sounds. That's definitely going to take some time, and I definitely haven't found that build just yet, but Captain Cold certainly belongs in it. Again, it's just a matter of how often we can actually protect that 2 defense creature. Deadshot. I'm actually pretty excited about this card. It's a 4/4 with Hunter and Firepower. Hunter, of course, meaning that you can attack anything regardless of attack restrictions, and then Firepower being more or less the spell damage thing we talked about earlier. This is probably a core card to the shoot randomly Joker style gameplay. Anything with Firepower is going to be really important for that archetype, and Deadshot is no exception to that. He's also himself an Arkham inmate, so he contributes to that archetype as well. I don't know if once the dust is settled and everybody's optimized every deck and every archetype, whether the shoot randomly gameplay style and the Arkham inmate deck are going to be the same thing, but if they are, it's convenient that Deadshot is an Arkham inmate. Giganta. I'm actually pretty hyped about this card. These stats are so good, man. 7/7 is insane in this game. The trade-off, of course, being that you have to discard a card, so maybe it belongs in the Harley Quinn Adrenaline package. It probably does. 7/7 is just crazy, man. 7/7 deals with quite a few gold cards, and this is a silver card. So we're playing this card on turn 3. Our opponent playing a card on turn 5 doesn't even deal with this directly, with it, or at least without it dying itself. Man, I don't know, man. Giganta seems pretty good. 7/7 is no joke. Definitely a card I've got my eye on. Parasite's up next. He's a 2/2, and he reads deploy. Deal 1 damage to 2 random enemy recruits. Parasite gets +1/+1 for each damage dealt. This is another example of a card that takes advantage of Firepower. Anything that isn't combat damage will reap the rewards of Firepower. And Parasite is not combat damage. So we're probably running this card in that type of archetype. Parasite does not have the Arkham inmate tag, so maybe that's something to keep in mind. Maybe that's the reason we run Punchline. We talked about running a handful of cards that perhaps don't have the Arkham inmate tag. Perhaps Parasite is one of those cards. Peacemaker up next also has Hunter, and he reads deploy. Your recruits with Hunter deal double damage to leaders they are attacking this turn. Man, that is a spooky effect. Anything that reads double is terrifying. I will say, if you're going to put a terrifying effect in the game, I'm glad it's going on Peacemaker. What a cool character to give this effect, though. Now, the big downside to this is, of course, that Peacemaker does not have speed. So Peacemaker's own effect is not going to apply to himself. Technically, it does apply to himself, I think, but he's not able to attack the turn that he comes into play. So maybe if you can give him speed somehow, you can get some crazy value out of that. But as far as I can tell, that's not the route for this card. Here's a fun one. This is another example of a yellow card or a yellow rarity gem. This means the card is an ultimate card, and it also means you can only run 1 copy of the card. And in this case, it is Heart of Darkness. Transform a damaged friendly recruit into Eclipso with 3 charges. Now, you might be wondering what Eclipso is. Eclipso is a leader. So you're going to get a 3rd leader once you play Heart of Darkness. Now, the opponent does have to treat this as a win condition. The opponent must remove all of your leaders. Doesn't matter if you have 2 leaders, 3 leaders, 4 leaders, 5 leaders, 6 leaders. They must defeat every single one of your leaders, and that includes Eclipso. Eclipso is a 3/10, so he always has this attack value of 3, which is pretty awesome. And then he also has a triggerable effect, just like every other leader. His trigger effect costs 2, and it reads, an enemy recruit deals damage equal to its attack value to another random enemy character. That's a pretty cool effect, and once Eclipso enters play, he's going to have access to 3 charges anyway, so he'll be able to use his effect the turn he comes into play, and then he'll be able to use his effect the next turn as well, because he'll naturally gain 1 charge from the start of turn. Very, very, very cool. I like this design a lot. Very cool card. I'm not sure what deck this belongs in, but I'm definitely excited to experiment with the card until we find an optimal strategy for Eclipso, because anything that gives you an extra leader is cool in my book. And I will tell you that if you haven't looked through the database, there are other cards that give you more leaders. So perhaps maybe there's some crazy 6-leader deck archetype out there that's going to go crazy. Another card that goes a little crazy is Mr., and I'm not going to attempt to pronounce his name because I don't know the trick to pronouncing it, Mischief. Replace your deck with random super rare and ultimate cards. So we just went over what an ultimate card is. That's those yellow gem cards. But the other cards, the super rare cards, these are purple cards. So one of the most recent example we went over was Peacemaker, but Parasite was also one of these super rare cards. Pretty cool card, pretty cool effect. This is almost certainly not an optimal card, but it will be a very fun card to experiment with, especially once you're in the lower collection ranges, you know, the beginning of your collection, or maybe you're a new player after the game has been out for a while. You can pick up this card and experiment with a ton of fun cards that you otherwise wouldn't have access to. And I love those types of cards in card games. Very, very cool card. All right, the bigger they are. The bigger they are reads KO an enemy recruit with 5 attack or more. We talked about how there are certain archetypes in the game that care about having 5 attack. It's kind of weird that this card is in Anarchy because there are so many 5 attack cards in the Anarchy faction. So I suspect that the 5 attack archetype will probably be built around, or not necessarily built around Anarchy, but it'll probably splash into Anarchy every so often. I think the real reason this card is in this faction is because you need some amount of removal for everybody, right? But also this is a very aggressive faction, playing a lot of aggressive cards, and hopefully we'll be able to deal with a lot of their smaller creatures by either trading or they have to trade into us. And then the bigger they are can help deal with those kind of bigger creatures that are being used as blockers, so we can just instantly kill those off and then start attacking the opponent's face. So yeah, that's probably the role that the bigger they are is going to play. Next up is Crackshot. This is another probably auto-include in that kind of shoot randomly play style. Crackshot reads, you have firepower +1 this turn and draw a card. The end draw a card part of that is pretty important, but also you've just got a free firepower +1. Of course, that synergizes with the Joker, the shoot randomly, the Parasite. All of these effects benefit from Crackshot. We're moving more into the adrenaline side of things now. So Cupid reads, deploy, discard a card, deal 6 damage to a random enemy character, and she's a 6/3. I'm not sure I love this effect. It's going to be annoying when you need to use it as a removal tool, and unfortunately it hits an enemy leader. It's going to be annoying when you need to close out the game and it doesn't hit the enemy leader, it hits a recruit. So it's a little bit random, and normally the randomness I'm fine with. You know, I've been talking about how excited I am to play with shoot randomly and the Joker, but in this case, the randomness is going on such a big swing. It's 6 damage, and if that doesn't go where you need it to go, that can be very disruptive to your own game plan. So I'm sure it's fine, but when I'm looking to cut cards from my discard adrenaline deck, Cupid might be one of the first ones to go. Or maybe the 6 damage is just too big of a swing to ignore. Maybe we just have to run this card. Next up is Copperhead. He's a 7/4. He has Adrenaline Hunter. So we've talked about what Hunter does. We know what Adrenaline does because we've talked about it a handful of times in this video. I don't know if a 7/4 is worth running if it only sometimes has Hunter. I'm not sure if I would run this card, even if it was just a 7/4 with Hunter. No, that's a lie. I would run it. Yeah, we would run that card. I'm lying to you right now. We would absolutely run a 7/4 with Hunter. But do we run a 7/4 with Hunter that has the condition of requiring adrenaline? I'm not sure. It's so hard to evaluate these adrenaline cards, I'm not gonna lie. I think this next one's a little easier to evaluate. Cheetah is a 5/4. Now, Cheetah does have 2 less attack than the Copperhead that we just went over, but she already has Hunter built into her kit, so I already like this card more than Copperhead. But that's okay. She does have an adrenaline keyword, and it's adrenaline speed. If we have adrenaline, she can attack the turn she comes into play. But honestly, I don't even think we need the adrenaline proc on this card. This is a card I like in the adrenaline archetype because I'm very happy to play this as a 5/4. I'm not very happy to play it as a 5/4. Like, I'm just kind of okay with playing it as a 5/4, but I'm super happy when it gets its speed effect, and that's the type of card we're going to be looking to play in the adrenaline archetype. I don't think Copperhead falls into that category, but I do think Cheetah does. Harley Quinn's up next. She's a 3/6. This is a big payoff card. After you've played an Anarchy card, Harley gets +2 this turn. Adrenaline Flurry. So I think if you're going to run this card, I think it has to be an mono Anarchy deck. So meaning that you're not running another faction, you're just running 2 Anarchy leaders. The reason I say that is because if you're running Anarchy and then another faction, you're less likely to be playing Anarchy cards, so you're less likely to get value out of Harley's effect here. Maybe it's fine to just run this into a regular deck. Maybe you're okay as long as you just play 1 other Anarchy card. So maybe I'm misjudging that, but I really want to be playing 2 Anarchy cards a turn if I'm going to be using this. Maybe even more than that. Personally, I'm looking to play this in a mono deck rather than a standard deck. I do think this card's really good though, even though it does have the adrenaline condition for Flurry, because there's going to be situations where you don't even need the Flurry, and this is going to be perfectly fine. Count Vertigo's a 4/3, and he reads deploy. Each player discards a random card, then draws a card. I kind of wish the order on this was different. I kind of wish it was like, each player discards a card and then draws a card at the start of their next turn. Maybe something like that. And then maybe give him some more stats, because obviously that's worse for you. But it's potentially better for you because it lets you proc adrenaline effects. I don't know, maybe the way this plays out already is just fine. This is kind of a card you have to feel out and play to really appreciate, I think. But it's pretty disruptive, right? It forces the opponent to discard a random card, and by the time we're in the silver category, the opponent's hand's going to be relatively empty, so you could really hurt them with this effect, actually. I'm slowly selling myself on this effect. Yeah, you know what? I actually kind of like this. I don't know how good it will be. I definitely don't think it will be like some crazy meta-defining card, but I think this is better than I was initially giving it credit for. All right, moving on to golden cards, the big, exciting payoff cards. Let's start off with Amazo, because he's the vanilla card. Amazo is a 9/6, again, a vanilla card. He's not an Arkham inmate, he's just a dude, and he's 9/6. 9/6, I don't think is good enough stats to run. Don't get me wrong, there are definitely vanilla cards in other archetypes that I think are worth running, and there are even golden vanilla cards that I think are worth running. I don't think Amazo is one of them, just because it's leaning more into an attack value than it is into a defense value. And like I said, I think defense is a much more important stat. But maybe you just get away with running it because stats are good. But why run Amazo when you can run Bizarro? Bizarro, man, I love this card. This is really cool. Bizarro is an 11/5 with shield. Doesn't stop there though. He has deploy. If Bizarro is in your back row, swap each player's back row with their front row. So you can push the opponent's leaders right to their front row. They can no longer hide for the rest of the game, and now they're going to get Bizarroed. They're going to get hit for 11 damage each turn. It's going to go crazy. I really like Bizarro as a way to close out games for aggressive decks. I don't know if it'll end up making the cut at the end, but I think it's really cool, and I hope this is as good as I think it is, and I think it's quite good. So yeah, I'm pretty high on Bizarro for aggressive decks. I'm excited to try it out. I am so happy that Atrocitus got a card, man, and I'm happy to report that I also really like the design of this card. This probably goes in the shoot randomly deck / Joker deck, and the reason for it is after any character is dealt damage, Atrocitus gets +1 attack. Just between one shoot randomly and just between one Joker, Atrocitus is going to receive +7 attack. That's not to mention any other attacks that happen during that turn or any other amount of damage that happens during that turn. There's so much cool stuff you can do with Atrocitus. I'm really excited to try him out. I mean, 7 defense is also pretty good, man. Next up, we've got Bazooka, a golden action card, and it just reads deal 8 damage to a leader. All right, 8 damage to a leader. Why not, man? That's like half of some leaders' healths, so seems good. Undying Ruin. This is going to be a card people love, man. Well, I guess some people are going to hate it as well. Destroy the top 5 cards of the opponent's deck. Create 2 copies of this in your deck, and then draw a card. Now, the 2 copies that get shuffled to your deck, those are free. There are some really cool combos you can do with this. In my next video, we're probably going to talk about the Tactics faction, and there's some combos in that that you want to pair with Undying Ruin. There's definitely a mill deck that exists out there, and it's going to be scary to deal with. I can say that the game does end if you try to draw a card and your deck is empty. You lose. So milling in this game could be potentially really disruptive, and Unending Ruin is going to be a big part of that. Reverse Flash is up next. I'm surprised Reverse Flash got a vanilla card like this. Happy to see it. Shout out to Eobard. He's a 5/4 with flurry and speed. Reverse Flash can only attack leaders. Reverse Flash does not care about your recruits. He's coming straight for your leader, and he's doing it with 10 damage. The turn he's played too, that's pretty crazy. Reverse Flash is definitely a card to look out for in aggressive decks. Compare Reverse Flash to, say, Bazooka. Bazooka's getting out 8 damage. Now, Bazooka can more or less ignore blockers, where Reverse Flash has to deal with those blockers somehow. But Reverse Flash is getting out 10 damage as opposed to the 8 on Bazooka. I think I prefer the Reverse Flash, but that honestly, that question probably comes down to contextually what the rest of your deck looks like, whether it's better to run Reverse Flash or Bazooka. Yeah, it's a contextual question. Check out this card, Enchantress, firepower +2. Obviously, it goes directly into that shoot randomly Joker style archetype, that ping damage. Big fan of Enchantress. Very excited to use this card. There's going to be turns where this card goes absolutely crazy, and I'm all here for it. Doomsday. Doomsday is a 10/4. Man, this is an exciting card. Check this out. With Parting Shot, return Doomsday to your hand. So Doomsday is going to constantly go back and forth in between your hand. You're always going to have to deal with this 10/4 every single turn. I will say, I think it would have been really cool if it read Parting Shot, return Doomsday to your hand with +2 attack or something like that, just because it'd feel like he's getting stronger every time he comes back, and it'd be a little bit thematic to the character. But this is also fantastic. I mean, it's still a 10/4. It's a lot to deal with, right? So it feels like there's maybe a thematic missed opportunity there, but it's still a great design, and one that's going to be cool to play around with. Next up, we've got Deathstroke. Now, this is an ultimate card, so we're going to only run 1 copy of this card, and it reads Lethal. After an enemy character is KO'd, ready Deathstroke. Very cool effect. One thing to keep in mind is that it doesn't have to be Deathstroke that destroys the card. You could attack with Deathstroke, then have a card effect or an ability or something else destroy an enemy card, then Deathstroke would re-ready, then Deathstroke could attack again, and then you can constantly keep this attack string going with Deathstroke. A spooky card, one that's going to be difficult to deal with, and if you can protect Deathstroke somehow and let him kill off something with his lethal effect, because lethal is kind of like poisonous. I don't think we've talked about lethal in this video, so I'll mention that. So if you can protect Deathstroke while he's attacking, he can potentially clear the entire enemy board. Unsure what that might look like. Perhaps maybe there's some might cards that would work really well with that. Who is to say? We've got a Joker Recruit, who is also an ultimate card, so this is another one where you can only run one copy of it. He's a 6/4, and he reads, after a friendly Arkham inmate is KO'd, deal 4 damage to a random enemy character. So this does have synergy with Firepower, because this is non-combat damage that's happening here. But it does have to be an Arkham inmate that's dying. So we're splashing in a lot of different archetypes simultaneously. Maybe it's optimal, maybe it's not, because I think you're dipping into too many things at once. But maybe it's okay when you're building a mono deck, because you have to put so many cards in anyway. You're dipping into the Firepower, you're dipping into cards that proc off of Firepower, so stuff like Shoot Randomly, Parasite, and then you're also dipping into Arkham inmates themselves. But maybe that's fine, because like I said, maybe it's a mono deck that this belongs into, and also a lot of the, Firepower archetype that we've been talking about does involve a lot of those cards anyway, so maybe this is just fine. And we're not actually splashing into too many different things anyway. Maybe it's just okay. But my instinct is that this is either a mono strategy, or we're getting a bit too greedy by also running Joker. We're probably just better off running, focusing on the Enchantress, the Atrocitus. You know what? We probably get away with Joker. You only have to put one of them in the deck anyway, right? So we just run Joker, we run double Enchantress, we run double Atrocitus, and those are all of our gold cards in that archetype. Yeah, you know what? I sold myself on Joker. I like Joker. Keep him, put him in the deck. Just 2 more cards to go. Let's go over Disorganized Crime first. It is a gold action. It reads, each friendly Arkham inmate makes a bonus attack at random. Adrenaline, give them +2 before they attack. Whoa, okay. I'm going to be a bit of a doubter on this card. I don't think it's great, but I think that there's too much going on with this card. First of all, we need a lot of Arkham inmates in play. We need a bonus gold energy to play, or a bonus gold resource to play. We need to have adrenaline proc. Well, we don't need adrenaline to proc, but we're often going to want adrenaline to proc. We're going to need available units or available cards to be able to attack with this, and we're going to need those to be Arkham inmates, as I said before. It just sounds very situational to me. And situational is not the way we want to describe our aggressive rushdown discard deck. The last card we're going to go over is a really cool one. It's called Surprise. It reads, deploy a random golden recruit from your opponent's deck. So you just steal one of their golden recruits and you get to put it in play. Plus adrenaline, give them speed. I don't even think you need the adrenaline proc from this for it to be good. This is just a really cool effect. Not only are you stealing their card from them, but you get to put it in play for yourself. That's pretty awesome. Can't complain about that. Okay, I'm adding these last few cards in post. These were previously not in the video, but since the database got reposted, these cards have been added. So now we have 5 new cards for the Anarchy faction, and we're going to go over them. I already had this video fully rendered, and now I have to re-render it and re-edit it, and it's just a little bit of a hassle, but it's fine. Forgive the out of order. We're going back to silver now. Again, this is because we're adding this one in post. My apologies. Laugh It Up is a silver card. It reads, discard your hand. So it's an immediate way to get all your cards out of your hand for all of that adrenaline synergy. Really good to see this card because it's a nice way to catch up. Let's say you curve out poorly in the first few turns of the game, but now you top deck this card. Now you can get your adrenaline stuff going. Good addition to the adrenaline package just before even we've gotten to the second half of the effect. The discard your hand is great. At the start of your next turn, draw 2 cards. Okay, yes. Yeah, this is a great card for the adrenaline package. I've already gone over the 5 cards before I'm talking about them here in the video. I've read through them, and I can say now that I've seen these 5 other cards, I'm way more confident that Adrenaline is going to be not only a fun archetype, but a pretty viable one as well. Next up, we have Mob Justice. This is a bit of a combo with the Gotham Riots that we talked about earlier. It reads, if your spaces are full, KO an enemy recruit. So a strong removal tool, not the only removal tool that Anarchy has access to, but this one has no restrictions on it. I mean, I suppose the restriction is how many cards you have on board, but hopefully your board's going to be relatively full. And, worst case scenario, you do have that combo, and there are cards in other archetypes that can fill your board really quickly as well. So depending on how you build your deck, Mob Justice should be a relatively consistent removal tool, though obviously it is more situational than others. Partners in Crime summons both Punch and Julie. This is a bronze card, so was Mob's Justice. I'm not sure if I mentioned that for Mob's Justice. Julie and Punch themselves aren't particularly exciting. They're just 3/1s, but the exciting thing about it is that they're both Arkham inmates, so they're going to have direct synergy with all of your Arkham inmate stuff. But on top of that, you're also just playing 2 cards. Now, they might not be the best statted cards in the world, and they're obviously very vulnerable to AoE effects, but I think most Arkham inmate decks are going to appreciate running Partners in Crime. Joker's Toxin, again, leaning into that discard strategy for Anarchy. This time it's a silver card though, and it reads, after you play or discard this, deal 5 damage to a random enemy leader. I think most times we're just going to want to discard this. We're not going to actually play this card from our hand, unless of course we top deck it, and in that case, then we're going to have to play it because we need to get rid of it. Yeah, very cool card. In the original version of this video, before we had access to these 5 additional cards that I'm now adding in post, I actually said at the end of this video, hey, I wish there was a Anarchy card that actually rewarded you for discarding itself rather than just having more discard cards, and Joker's Toxin is exactly what I was looking for. Very happy to see that. The final card we're going to go over is Jailbreak, and it reads, summon 2 Bronze Arkham inmates from the top half of your deck. Interesting thing about this is it won't hit something like Partners in Crime, because Partners in Crime itself is not a recruit. It summons recruits, but the card itself is not a recruit. There's 2 different ways you can use Jailbreak. You can kind of just throw it into a deck that runs Arkham inmates, and I think that's how you'll see most people use it. Or you could run really key important Arkham inmates and run a small number of them, and that way every time you play Jailbreak, you know, hey, I'm going to hit those exact cards. I know what they're going to be, or at least I have a good idea of what they're going to be, and I know they're going to be big, impactful cards, and they're always going to be bronze cards, right? They're never going to be, you know, gold or silver, but just that targeting, knowing, hey, I know I'm going to hit these 2, that can be super important. Oh, and I'll also mention the cards that I didn't really get to evaluate when we were doing the Energy faction video, because unfortunately, we didn't know what Firepower did at the time. Now we do know what Firepower does. Let's go ahead and take a look at those 2 energy cards, starting with Booster Gold. Booster Gold is a 4/5 with Firepower +1. Seems good if we're going to maybe splash into the Energy faction for this kind of Firepower archetype, but also even outside of that particular interaction, Booster Gold probably just makes his way into the Lightning Bolt deck. We talked a lot about Lightning Bolt as a strategy in the Energy faction video. Booster Gold probably plugs right into that just because he's going to be giving those lightning bolts a little bit of extra damage. Cosmic Staff is in a similar situation. Cosmic Staff just reads, give a friendly recruit +1 firepower, plus this card generates a bronze resource. So you kind of get to play this card for quote unquote free. It's not that simple, but we'll call it for free. And then also you get a little bit of firepower, which is fantastic. Again, probably plugs into that lightning bolt strategy. But there you go. That's it from me. We talked about all of the Anarchy cards, and we caught up on the 2 energy cards we didn't really get to talk about last time. I'm signing out here. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.